Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and this is actually Hardcore Hardware News 2. That's right, I decided on a name for this finally. So today we're going to be covering Ryzen because it launched yesterday, there's no more NDA on it, and we're going to be covering the GTX 1080 Ti. Now, I don't have either of them, okay? There's 1080 Ti samples already going around, I've seen a few on Facebook. But Ryzen, I'm getting my CPU tomorrow. I have no idea when I'm getting a motherboard. I have zero plans currently to buy a Ryzen motherboard just because, well, if desperation forces me, I will, but I'd rather not because there's other content I would like to do, and I need the budget to do that other content before Ryzen. But who knows? I might end up buying one. So let's just kick right off with, the Ryzen news. So performance. I'm not going to do performance testing. Definitely not gaming tests. Well, I'm going to do benchmarks, but I'm not going to do gaming tests. And the reason why I'm not going to do any gaming tests is because I don't have any games. I don't know what you all want me to test. It's like I have Dirt Rally. That's the only game that I own that was released in 2016. Yeah. So I really don't have a good library of games to test with. And you might be like I don't even have Crysis, okay? I don't have Crysis or Crysis 2 or Crysis 3. I don't have... I think I might have Battlefield 3. Oh, right, that would be tied to my Origin account, so I would have that. So I have Battlefield 3. That's probably the most modern game I own, other than Dirt Rally. And Dirt Rally being a racing game isn't exactly graphically intensive. So I'm not doing gaming performance tests at all. I just don't have the games for it, and I really don't think spending $200 on games that I don't even want to play or test is a good way to, spend the AHOC budget, as that could go into much more fun things like LN2, Volt mod parts, old GPUs, old CPUs. You get the idea. Motherboards. You get the idea. It just doesn't make sense for me to do gaming tests, but from what I've seen so far of the reviews available on the internet, there is a lot of variance in terms of performance from review to review. Now, one thing I'm kind of confused about is that a lot of people expected Ryzen to beat Kaby Lake in gaming, especially the i7-7700K. Kaby Lake has a 7% IPC advantage. Like, clock for clock, Kaby Lake is 7% faster. Okay? 7%. And that's ignoring the fact that Kaby Lake is clocked higher. Okay? So assuming that you are in a perfectly CPU limited scenario, you should see perfectly linear scaling from increases in single-threaded performance. And therefore, in any kind of benchmark where the CPU is really bottlenecking the test, you should be seeing Kaby Lake beating Ryzen by almost 20%. Easy. Like, that's just like, yeah, that would happen. There's also a whole bunch of issues with reviews just being all over the place. So, one major issue with Ryzen right now is the simultaneous multi-threading implementation. It's brand new. AMD never had simultaneous multi-threading in the past, and simultaneous multi-threading, as well as the layout of the cores on Ryzen, actually does some weird things to performance if you mismanage where which thread is thrown. So the OS, so there's a good chance we will be seeing a Windows update that changes how the OS handles. Well, apparently there's some core parking issues related to power savings, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we saw some tweaks to how Windows handles scheduling for Ryzen CPUs. Because there was a patch for that exact same issue on the FX line, where the FX line had massive issues with just cores basically getting, the Windows OS wouldn't properly allocate the threads. It would basically, because, an FX chip is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cores, but you have 2 cores per module. So it would, if you had 2 threads in Windows that needed to be allocated, they would put them on 2 cores in one module, which means the performance sucked because they had to share resources. So simultaneous multi-threading runs into a similar issue. I wouldn't be surprised if some of that was going on. I bet some games accidentally cause that, because we are seeing a well, there are a few tests out there where sites have turned off simultaneous multi-threading, and they've gotten pretty good gains in terms of actual in-game performance. So, yeah, dodgy SMT implementation. This should get cleared up with software updates over time. Another issue is Ryzen has memory problems because we'll cover Ryzen RAM later, but there's some issues with the RAM and how it clocks and how it works, and just everything is messed up there. And there are BIOS issues. Now, mostly what I've heard is that the BIOSes are just dodgy in terms of implementation. Like, some things are broken, some things are buggy, but I haven't heard too much about there being massive performance differences. Except like there was some pre-release BIOSes that like I hope nobody tested on that were really really bad. But the more recent BIOSes should all be pretty good. So I don't know. I think yeah, there's some software work left to be done to really get Ryzen performing at its best, and even at its best, I would not expect it to be Kaby Lake. Especially in CPU bottlenecked situations. And by CPU bottlenecked situations, I mean high FPS gaming. We are high. Because what a lot of people don't seem to realize is like what you're really running up against a wall on a CPU, it's just a case of FPS. Okay? It's not a case of resolution, or, well, sometimes it'll be physics. Okay? The games with a very high, like StarCraft. StarCraft has CPU-based physics calculations as well as the really high unit counts. StarCraft is horrifically written, and I don't know if they've updated it, but I remember Wings of Liberty, at least, if you had enough units on the screen, almost it would bog down i7s. It would bog down i7s just fine. So in those kinds of scenarios, Ryzen is still going to lose against Kaby Lake. This is just a fact. Korean MMOs, when you're playing PvP, it's going to lose to Kaby Lake. There's not really anything anybody can do about that, though. It's single-threaded. You're gonna hit the limit. And the other thing is, if you're going for stupid high FPS, so we're talking in excess of 144 hertz, which is doable. I think AOC recently just announced a 240 hertz gaming monitor with FreeSync at 1080p. If you want to run 240 hertz on Ryzen with like, an SLI setup, because that's pretty much the only way you're pushing. SLI or Crossfire is the only way you're pushing 240 hertz right now. You're gonna have issues with a Ryzen CPU. That's just no way around it. It's almost certainly gonna end up bottlenecking, especially if you run multi GPU, and most likely Crossfire is gonna be the one more likely to cause that, because Crossfire is a bit CPU hungry, as well as a bit dodgy about its implementation, as I found out when I was benchmarking two RX 480s on a 6950X, only to disable 2 cores to get enough performance to actually beat a 5960X, also with 2 RX 480s at similar core clocks. So yeah, Ryzen simply, if you're going for really high FPS gaming, I wouldn't buy a Ryzen CPU. If you're going for if you play a lot of really badly written games, I wouldn't buy a Ryzen CPU. But if you're doing mostly AAA gaming, you should be fine. And Ryzen does offer some significant advantages. First of all, if you're a live streamer and you use CPU encoding, which is generally considered better, like you get better quality with CPU encoding over GPU encoding, especially with the bit rates that live streams deal with, you're going to get better quality. So for that, Ryzen is better, because 8 cores is better than 4 cores if you need to encode and at the same time as you play your games. That's not really rocket science, that's just kind of obvious. So Ryzen obviously has an advantage there. If you edit video, like if you do any work which is heavily threaded and can't be accelerated by a GPU, because that's another thing. A lot of the sort of X99 style workloads don't really make sense. Today, you can accelerate video encoding with GPUs, you can accelerate rendering with GPUs, you can accelerate pretty much any of these sort of brute forcey workloads with GPUs, but things like code compiling loves threads and it can't run on GPUs. And there's some other sort of niche applications that don't run on GPUs. So for that, you know, the CPU is great. And really what I feel Ryzen does is it makes X99 completely and utterly obsolete. Okay? Which is a great thing, because X99 is awful. I hate X99 so much. It costs too much, it's unstable as hell, it's buggy as hell, it's a pain to work with, it's awful. Awful, awful, awful. It does still clock a little bit higher than Ryzen, but it's awful. And it's too expensive. So X99, the 6900K, obsolete. 5960X, obsolete. What else? 5820K, obsolete. 5930K, obsolete. 6850K, obsolete. 6800K, obsolete. 6950X, well, you can still, it's still the only CPU that'll get you that top spot on the 3D Mark, you know, benchmark tables, and it does have 2 extra cores, so it is still faster. But at that point, you got to start questioning somebody's sanity when they're willing to spend. Let's see, an R7 1700 is $300, and a 6950X is $1,700. That's like 8 times more. So if you're willing to spend 8 times more money for, no, that's not 8 times more. Yeah, that's nowhere near 8 times more. Sorry about my math. It's like 6 times more. 5 times more. 5 to 6 times more. So if you're willing to spend 5 to 6 times more money for basically 25% more performance, I'm not really seeing it, but sure. The other benefit, of course, X99 has is 128 gig RAM support. You can put more RAM on it, and it does have more PCIe lanes. But those are kind of niche uses, and really not something any like normal user should worry about too much. So that's sort of your normal performance recap. That's, you know, cool. But you know what's really awesome? When you drop all those concerns about daily usage performance for filthy casuals and consider the possibilities of Ryzen with liquid nitrogen. Because the extreme overclocking performance of Ryzen is really, really, really good and fun. First of all, Ryzen right now is at the top of the Cinebench 8-core, Cinebench 15 and 11.5 8-core rankings on HardwareBot. It does that at 5.36-ish gigahertz. And it curb stomps a 6 gigahertz, well, it doesn't curb stomp it, but it beats a 6 gigahertz 5960X. And that is including the memory issues and all the other problems that Ryzen right now has being brand new. So that is going to probably get bigger, this gap is, over time. So Ryzen currently, right now, if you want to pick up some 8-core global first place points for Cinebench, Ryzen's your weapon of choice. Same goes for GPU Pi 1 billion. GPU Pi 1 billion for CPU. No, GPU Pi, yeah, for CPU. That works out. Because GPU Pi is an OpenCL benchmark, so you can run it on CPUs. So, yeah. So you can also take the top score in that category. Now, it doesn't do great on... So from what I've seen so far, it doesn't seem to do great on Super Pi, which really isn't that surprising. And that's pretty much it. It does really good in these sort of 8-core category benchmarks. It might be good for HardwareBot Prime. And... what other benchmarks are there? Well, yeah, HardwareBot Prime, I'd like to see done on it. So, yeah. But the thing I'm more excited about, other than the fact that, yeah, you can get some pretty nice scores in the 8-core rankings with Ryzen, is that Ryzen is basically the poor man's 5960X, or at least it should be. And I will be testing it for 3D Mark. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if you want to get a high score on 3D, for the longest time you've been kind of screwed in terms of how much it costs to do it. In the past, you had to have X79 and a $500, you know, 3930K or a 4930K, and that was expensive. More recently, you had to have X99, a 5960X, because the 5960X is 33% faster than any 6-core. So that was a $1,000 CPU and, again, a $300 to $500 motherboard. Great. Now, right now, you need a $1,700 10-core and that same $300 to $500 motherboard. But the funny thing is that $1,700 10 core on water cooling gets about 27,000 points in 3D Mark physics. That's at least what mine does at 4.4 gigahertz. Mine is not an exceptional sample. There are some chips that could go like 4.5, 4.6 with the same kind of cooling setup and the same kind of voltage, but those are like rare, really, really rare. So you wouldn't really want to bet on getting one of those. On the other hand, Ryzen pretty consistently hits 5.1 gigahertz, has no cold bug and no cold boot bug, and costs $300 for your, $320 for the cheapest SKU. So if you want to go start, benchmarking 3D Mark and not get curb stomped by 8 cores and 10 cores, Ryzen is a really, really, really good option, because at 5.1 gigahertz, by my calculations, it should work out to between sort of 26,000 and 28,000. Now, the 6950X on LN2 is, of course, still going to beat a Ryzen chip. That's just like, it's got 10 cores. You can't really expect anything less of a 10 core. But if you don't really care about being at the very, very, very top, and just want to get your sort of foot in the door for extreme overclocking for graphics cards, Ryzen is a really, really great option. Or at least it should be. I really want to test this. I think it'll be a great option, because no cold bug, no cold boot bug means it's very, very easy to run. You just fill up the LN2 pot, pull it down to minus 190, and let it sit there. Or minus 180, or whatever your LN2 pot is minimum capable. I think mine does about minus 1... On FX, I remember seeing like minus 193, but that might be because my thermal probe is calibrated weird or something. Like, my thermal probe is really not that great. Because I can calibrate it to read LN2 properly, can't calibrate it to read ambient then. Like, if I calibrate it to read minus 196, like stick it in LN2, calibrate it to read the boiling point of LN2, and then pull it out and hold it in my hand, it's going to read like 15 degrees, even though I'm a human and I should be well above 30 degrees. So, yeah, that probe is really dodgy, but it read minus 193 with a full pot on a Phenom 2, so yeah, you can run Ryzen really, really, really cold, and you don't really have to worry about babying it. It's not like Broadwell E or Haswell E, where you have to be like, oh no, it's not at exactly a minus 100, or it's not exactly at minus 80, because Broadwell E is actually even worse for cold bugs than Haswell E. So, you don't really have to worry about babying the temperature too much. You can just fill it up and rock and roll. So it should be relatively easy to bench, and if the clocks are good, then the scores should be good. And that means it makes a really good platform for 3D benchmarking. And if you're thinking, yeah, but BuildZoid, LN2 is expensive. Let me put it this way. A 6950X costs $1,700, right? And the motherboard's going to cost $300. The Ryzen motherboard and CPU together, so CPU is $320, motherboard is $250. So that's like 500. You know what? Let's round it and say that's 500. Let's just say it's $600. Okay, let's say you bought a more expensive motherboard or whatever, you got scammed, or I don't really care. Let's just round it up to $600. That leaves you with $1,100 available to still buy cooling gear. You can buy a DWAR for about $500. You can get a 30-liter for about $500. That leaves you with still $600 to buy other things. You could buy a LN2 pot for $250, and then a GPU pot for another $250. And if you're buying from Kingpin Cooling, he actually does a bundle where you get a discount for your GPU and LN2 pot at the, like GPU and CPU pot at the same time. So you could very easily basically set up a fully capable LN2 runnable Ryzen 3D benchmarking setup for the same price as a water-cooled 6950X build. That's ridiculous. That's insane. Like, that's freaking awesome. Okay? And you get the benefit. It's competitive for 8-core scores. You get an LN2 pot. LN2 pots can go on anything and everything. Like, literally, you can run it on your Kaby Lake, you can run it on your FX, you can run it, like, the DWAR, again, is a case of you can use it, again, with everything. What else is there? And then there's the GPU pot, which, again, fits all your GPUs. Like, Why aren't you buying it now? So yeah, but I do need to test the physics performance. It should really be about 26 to 28K, which is actually more than a water-cooled 5960X setup or a water-cooled 6900K setup, or yeah, you know, it's competitive. It's really, really competitive for 3D Mark, or at least it should be. And even if it's on the low side of my estimate of 26 to 28K, 26K Firestrike physics is really good. Like, still really, really good. That's more than you can get with, like, I can get out of a, like, the average 5960X will not do that high, even on water cooling and with excessively high voltages. So, yeah. So that's why I'm super, super hyped for Ryzen. Now, Ryzen does have a few bugs as of right now. Well, no, it has one major issue right now, and it has one other thing that you just have to keep in mind when buying motherboards. So the major issue right now is the RAM. The RAM on Ryzen, you don't have access to subtimings, which means the performance is a little bit wonky, and the overclocking is bad, and the stability is terrible. And the reason for this is that different memory ICs don't all like the same subtimings, and the way Ryzen's memory controller currently works is that it has preset subtimings for 2130, for 1866, 2133, 2400, 2666, 2933, and 3200. Okay? 2933 and 3200 are extremely loose, and as such, pretty, like, they can actually give you often worse performance than if you're running like 2400 or 2666, because the timings for 2400 and 2666 are tighter. So they actually perform better, even if you're at lower frequency, because they're just better timings. At the end of the day, if your RAM is running at stupid high frequency, but most of that time is spent waiting for your RAM to do stuff, which is what timings do. Timings basically say, your RAM has to be able to complete this operation in this given amount of time, and that time is specified in the timing multiplied by the clock speed of your RAM. So if you take a memory stick, raise its clock by 10%, and increase all of the timings by 50%, it's going to be way slower than a memory stick that is, you know, 10% lower clock speed. So clock speed isn't everything, and that's a bit of an... and the fact that the subtimings are the way they are just causes some pretty jarring issues with memory performance. It also causes stability issues, because certain memory ICs just don't like certain timings being at certain values. If you set certain timings too high on certain memory kits, they will not boot. If you have timings that are just static, you can't change them, causes compatibility issues. That's why we're seeing, like, that's why there's so many problems around RAM right now. The other thing is the performance thing. There is actually a way around that, which you can do with BCLK. So since the subtimings are all static and fixed to the multiplier you run, you could do things like boot a 24x multiplier, like set up the RAM for 24x, and then raise the BCLK of your system to 125 megahertz, and then you have the subtimings for, you know, 2400, which are tighter than any other, like anything in the 3 gigahertz range, and you still have the clock speed of 3 gigahertz. Now, there's one issue with doing this. BCLK overclocking is not available on all motherboards. The reason for this being that the only way to get BCLK overclocking working on Ryzen is through the use of an external clock generator. Basically, Ryzen's own there's 2 clock generator circuits on Ryzen motherboards. At least I know there's 2 oscillators on all of the motherboards that use have the extended frequency range for the BCLK. You have one right next to the socket, which I don't know if that goes through a clock generator, and then into the CPU, and then you have one a bit further away from the CPU socket, which has its own oscillator and a completely much bigger IC right next to it, and that's an external clock gen. That's the external clock gen. And that thing allows you to actually overclock the BCLK, because that other one is fixed to 100 megahertz. You can't do anything to it. But the external one can go from 100 megahertz to about 145. You start getting issues at around sort of 140, 135. But you can push it all the way to 145, and that means you can basically put really low memory put a low memory setting, and then run the really high BCLK, and that gives you the same sort of subtimings for a much higher memory frequency. So that's great. But the issue is it's limited to very few motherboards. As of right now, the only motherboards I know that have external clock generators are the Gigabyte Gaming K7 that has Gigabyte's Turbo B clock. That's what they call it, but it's just an external clock generator. It supposedly goes up to all the way up to 500 megahertz. It's too bad Ryzen CPUs can't apparently stay stable at that kind of base clock speed. The ASRock Taichi and the Professional Gaming also have external clock generators. I tried to check some other ASRock boards. I haven't noticed any other ones that have the external clock generators. The Taichi is the cheaper between the Pro Gaming and the Taichi. And the Professional Gaming also is the same PCB. They're basically identical boards. One of them is red, one of them is white. And the white one is a lot cheaper, and it's missing a few features that I kind of like, but I could probably solder back onto the motherboard if I really, really wanted to. Asus has the Crosshair. The Crosshair has an external clock generator as well. That's why there's all that extra circuitry under the socket. At the time, I didn't realize what it was for, but part of that's going to be an external clock generator. And the MSI board, MSI currently does not have an external clock generator. It definitely doesn't have one. They definitely don't have one on the X Power. So if you're interested in buying the X370 X Power, think about that a lot, because the lack of that BCLK overclocking could turn out to be quite a killer. Just because I have some suspicions about Ryzen overclocking that I want to test. Like, I really want to check if you can't potentially clock a little bit higher by using higher BCLK and lower multipliers instead of just really high multipliers and stock BCLK. There's also the RAM performance thing to keep in mind. But the other thing is the RAM thing will be patched. That will be getting patched in a month or two. It's just a case of right now it's static, and so there's all kinds of issues with the memory. But yeah, MSI doesn't have an external clock generator. That's not getting patched. It's literally not on the board unless they make a new revision. BioStar, I have no idea. I really doubt they do have a external clock generator, as generally they've been sort of the budget-oriented brand. So yeah, that pretty much covers it in terms of everything I wanted to say about Zen. I'm personally really happy with what Zen turned out to be. I can't wait to get my hands on my chip. Well, actually, I can't wait to get my hands on my motherboard for my chip, because the chip is turning up tomorrow, but no board. In terms of plans for content for Ryzen, I plan to do an ambient overclocking session, LN2 overclocking session, LN2 overclocking session where I do 3D Mark, like very specifically try to run 3D Mark. I'm thinking it'd be really cool to do like a GTX 1080Ti on LN2 plus Ryzen on LN2, just to see if I can't push, like, you know, an affordable system all the way to the top of the into the top upper limits of the 3D Mark rankings on hardware bot. Unfortunately, I don't really think I'm going to get a GTX 1080 Ti. Just judging on the way the channel is running right now, I really, really doubt it. But maybe Vega will come out, and if Vega comes out soon enough, then, you know, I'm willing to sell kidneys to get my hands on that. That's not the same for the GTX 1080 Ti. I'm not really a fan of some of the things that Nvidia does, like Titan X, like the lockdown Titan designs. I am not a fan of that. The lockdown PCBs, their overclocking restrictions freaking everywhere. It's like, you know, at some point it's like they actually spend R&D money to make it harder to overclock their stuff. You lower the power limit too low, the card goes into safety mode. You disable the temperature sensor physically, card goes into safety mode. You can't mod the BIOS because Nvidia has done a lot to make that really, really hard. What else is there? Right, power limit, temperature. Oh, if you try to bypass the VRM with an e-power, you run into that power limit issue again, because, hey, there's no power going through those shunts any longer. Better shut down, put the GPU in safety mode. The Boost 3.0 algorithm is extremely fun when you're around 0 degrees, because if you're around 0 degrees centigrade, what ends up happening is if you go above 0 degrees, you get plus 130 megahertz. And if you're below 0 degrees, you get minus 130 megahertz. So, you know, you can be running like 2.5 gigahertz on LN2, and for a very brief moment of time, the GPU goes positive in, say, 3D Mark Graphics Test 1, and it picks up an extra 130 megahertz and crashes instantly because, you know, that's exactly what I want my graphics card to do. Thanks, NVIDIA. And the other issue for me is like, that's talking about benchmarking, but for personal use, the reason why I don't use NVIDIA is because I rather like my mixed resolution Eyefinity setup, which NVIDIA doesn't currently support, and also 2 of my monitors are FreeSync. And I can actually use FreeSync on 1 of them at a time, not all 3, because there's issues with that, but I can FreeSync 1 of them. So yeah, you know, that's so I'm excited for Ryzen. That's sort of my plan for coverage. I'll almost certainly be doing an overclocking session with a Fury X on Ryzen. So like Ryzen LN2, Fury X LN2, all LN2 AMD system. And if Vega comes out, I really want to do the same. So now let's move on to the GTX 1080 Ti news. I've already complained about everything NVIDIA does wrong. What else is there to complain about? Oh yeah, I don't like Founders Edition cards because they suck in more ways than one. Like the PCB is terrible and the fan literally sucks air. Okay, I'll stop. Yeah, so the PCB is terrible. The heatsink is like NVIDIA's heatsink is still better than AMD's reference heatsink. Okay, it doesn't all like. Admittedly, NVIDIA never builds as hot running cards as say a 290X, but they still do a slightly better heatsink because there's not that big a difference in the thermal load on an NVIDIA card versus an AMD card, but those AMD heatsinks are really, really loud. So, yeah, but I'm still not a fan of the whole Founders Edition, and I really want to do some test with like blower cards versus like I have some theories about case airflow and all that for multi-GPU setups that I really, really want to test, but obviously getting the resources for that is borderline impossible, as I'd like to test it with really high power draw GPUs instead of something wimpy like an RX 480 where they don't really get that hot even if you put a terrible cooler on them. So back to the GTX 1080 Ti. It's coming soon. I don't know when, but there's samples already going around, so that's great. It's 11 gigs, and I don't know when. They might have even announced the release date, but I haven't bothered to check. That's how much I care. It's 11 gigs of GDDR5X because, you know, it needs to be worse than the Titan X in some way. So that's how. They're going to give it 1 gig less RAM. Like, that'll matter. But the cool thing about the 1080 Ti, which I'm actually kind of excited for, is we're going to be seeing some custom PCB designs, and those are going to be fun. So I'm really excited to see the Galax Hall of Fame LN2 edition, because the 980 Ti from Galax was crazy. That thing was insane. Like, I really wish I had a photo good enough to do a PCB breakdown, because when Galax designed it, they were like, well, you see, most companies would just build like a really tall VRM right around here, and like they would run out of space at around like the 12th or 14th phase. But, you know, that's weak sauce. What we're going to do is we're going to put 16 phases, and we're going to do it by putting 6 here and 10 behind them. And it's an awesome card. So I really, really want to do, like, first of all, I really wanted to do a video on that one, but more importantly, I really hope they do something crazy for the 1080 Ti as well. Asus is going to be almost certainly putting out a Matrix card. There's got to be an EVGA Kingpin edition. I can't wait to see one of those again. So I'm excited for the like custom cards we're going to see. They're going to be awesome. That's for sure. But I'm not really that excited for anything else about the 1080 Ti because, well, it's going to be just a Titan XP, except now less boring. So yeah, so that'll be fun. And hopefully I might be able to get my hands on one, but I kind of doubt it. Actually, no, not kind of doubt it. Really doubt it. Like, there's no way I'm getting a GTX 1080 Ti, especially after what I just said. Like, I don't like NVIDIA. So, yeah. That's that for today's news, Dan. I don't think I really missed anything. Oh, wait, I did. Tomorrow, I'm going to be live streaming Liquid Nitrogen on the AM3 Plus platform because, you know, we got to do like a remembrance stream for that blunder. But hey, it's still, like, I'd still say AM3 Plus is the easiest to run on LN2 of anything, like, out there. So yeah, I like AM3 Plus. I like it as a platform. It's cheap, it's easy to work with, it's robust, it's pretty hard to kill. Some of the motherboards are pretty terrible, but other than that, it's fine. Yeah. So I'm excited for that, because that'll be like a stream where everything won't go wrong. Ideally, I just cursed it, didn't I? Or jinxed it. It's jinxed it. Yeah. My English so good. So yeah. So tomorrow live stream 7 p.m. GMT or 7 p.m. UK time. Definitely UK time. I'm not sure if the UK is currently on GMT. Don't keep track of time much. Which causes a whole host of issues, but we're just going to ignore that. So, yeah, so live stream tomorrow. Wait a minute. Nah, there's nothing else to cover. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, join the notification squad, because, you know, if you've subscribed, you can even get spammed about everything I put out. And do please consider donating to the AHOC Patreon, or you can donate to me directly through PayPal now, because that works. So you can, you know, either patronize me or use PayPal to basically help out with the kinds of things I do here. And actually, speaking of the Patreon, I would like to give a huge thank you to all the patrons that have so far been patronizing me, because without you guys, I wouldn't be getting a Ryzen CPU tomorrow. I know I don't have a motherboard for it, but I wouldn't even have a CPU otherwise. So, huge thanks to all of you. Like, absolutely huge thanks. And everybody who donated through PayPal as well, technically. Because, yeah, it's just, yeah, thanks for the support. Like, seriously, it means a lot. I mean, I know I'm not really showing it, but I feel like the best way to repay you all is to bring you better content. So, it's kind of hard to do content without stuff to cover. So, yeah, I need to stop saying so much. So much. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.